"Sir, will you buy my bike?" The biker laughed at first, until the girl added quietly, "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." In that single sentence, the sound of engines, traffic, and busy lives faded away. What the bikers thought was a joke became a moment that changed them forever, because they soon learned who had taken everything from her. Poverty is often misunderstood because it does not always appear the way we expect it to. Many people imagine poverty as something loud and obvious, people shouting for help, standing with open hands, or begging on crowded streets. But in reality, poverty is usually quiet. It hides behind polite words, lowered eyes, and forced smiles. It speaks softly, especially through those who have learned too early that the world does not listen. The little girl in this story did not cry or scream. She did not run after the bikers or grab their clothes. She stood there holding her bike, speaking calmly, almost carefully, as if she did not want to disturb anyone. Her words were simple: "Buy my bike, sir. Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." There was no drama in her voice, yet the pain behind those words was heavy. That is how poverty often communicates, not with noise, but with quiet desperation. Hunger itself is silent. A stomach does not always growl loudly. Sometimes it tightens quietly, day after day, until the body becomes weak and the spirit tired. For many families living in poverty, hunger is not an emergency that happens once. It is a routine. Skipping meals becomes normal. Drinking water to feel full becomes a habit. Telling children that food will come later becomes a daily lie parents tell out of love, hoping tomorrow will be better. Parents who are poor often try their hardest to hide their suffering from their children. Mothers especially sacrifice silently. They give the last piece of bread to their child and say they are not hungry. They pretend they already ate at a neighbor's house. They smile while their bodies grow weaker. Poverty teaches parents to become actors, hiding pain so their children can feel safe, even when there is nothing to give. Children, however, notice everything. They see the empty shelves. They hear the quiet arguments at night. They feel the tension when rent is due. And sometimes, like the girl with the bike, they decide to carry the burden themselves. She did not ask for food for herself. She did not say she was hungry. She spoke for her mother. That tells us something important. Poverty often forces children to grow up too soon. It turns them into caregivers instead of being cared for. What makes soft-spoken poverty even more dangerous is how easily it is ignored. Loud problems attract attention. Quiet suffering blends into the background. A child standing calmly by the roadside does not look like an emergency. People assume someone else will help. They assume the situation cannot be that bad. This assumption allows poverty to continue unnoticed, untreated, and unchallenged. Society often rewards confidence and loudness, but poverty strips people of both. Rejection, humiliation, and repeated failure teach the poor to ask less, not more. They learn that begging can invite insults, suspicion, or even punishment. So they choose dignity over noise. They choose to ask once, politely, and then disappear. Many stories like this never reach us because the voices telling them are too gentle for a busy world. There is also shame attached to poverty. People feel embarrassed to admit they cannot provide basic needs. They fear judgment more than hunger. This shame silences them further. It convinces them that their suffering is a personal failure rather than a social one. As a result, poverty becomes invisible, not because it does not exist, but because those living in it are taught to hide. The bikers in this story almost missed it. They were laughing, relaxed, enjoying their freedom. The girl could have easily been ignored as just another child trying to sell something. But one sentence cut through the noise. It revealed that behind her calm face was a crisis. That moment reminds us how many similar sentences go unheard every day because no one pauses long enough to listen. Poverty speaking softly is not a weakness. It is a survival skill. It is learned in a world that often responds harshly to need. But the tragedy is that soft voices require attentive listeners. They require people willing to slow down, to look beyond appearances, and to hear what is not being shouted. When we understand that poverty often whispers, we begin to understand our responsibility. It means help does not always come from responding to loud demands, but from noticing quiet signs. A child selling belongings, a mother avoiding meals, a family withdrawing from community life. It means compassion must be proactive, not reactive. This key point challenges us to change how we listen, not just with our ears, but with awareness. Because somewhere, right now, another soft voice is speaking, not because the pain is small, but because it has learned that shouting does not always bring help. Children are often described as the future, yet they are the first to suffer when the present is broken. They do not create economic systems, they do not make laws, they do not start wars, and they do not decide who gets opportunities and who does not. Still, when those systems fail, it is children who bear the heaviest consequences. Poverty, injustice, neglect, and corruption may be caused by adults, but the cost is paid by the youngest and the weakest. The little girl selling her bike is not responsible for her situation. She did not choose to be poor. She did not choose hunger, loss, or instability, yet she is the one standing on the roadside, offering the one thing that may have given her joy, independence, or childhood freedom. A bicycle is not just a possession for a child. It is play, movement, escape, and innocence. When a child sells something like that, it is not a business decision. It is a sacrifice forced by circumstances beyond her control. Adult failures take many forms. Sometimes they are personal: absent parents, addiction, irresponsibility, or violence. Sometimes they are collective: broken economies, weak social safety nets, unfair wages, and lack of access to healthcare or education. Regardless of the source, the result is the same. Children step into roles they should never have to fill. They become earners instead of learners. They become protectors instead of being protected. In this story, the girl speaks not for herself, but for her mother. That detail is deeply significant. It shows how children in struggling families often feel responsible for adult survival. Instead of being reassured by parents, they become the ones offering solutions. Instead of being shielded from hardship, they are exposed to it fully. This emotional burden shapes them in ways that last a lifetime. When adults fail to provide stability, children lose more than food or shelter. They lose trust, trust in adults, trust in systems, trust in the idea that hard work guarantees safety. They learn early that life is unpredictable and unfair. While this may make them resilient, it also steals something precious: the right to feel secure. Education is often the first casualty of adult failure. Children drop out of school not because they lack intelligence or ambition, but because survival becomes more urgent than learning. A hungry child cannot concentrate. A worried child cannot dream. When school uniforms, books, or transport become unaffordable, education slowly slips away. The cycle of poverty continues, not because children are incapable, but because adults failed to protect their future. There is also an emotional cost that is rarely acknowledged. Children who grow up carrying adult responsibilities often suppress their own needs. They learn not to ask for toys, treats, or attention. They learn to stay quiet when they are scared or tired. Over time, this suppression can turn into anxiety, guilt, and a constant fear of loss. Even when life improves, the emotional scars remain. Society often praises such children, calling them strong, brave, or mature for their age. While these words sound positive, they hide an uncomfortable truth. A child should not have to be strong. Strength should be a choice, not a requirement for survival. When we admire children for enduring hardship, we sometimes forget to question why they had to endure it at all. Adult failure is also reflected in how communities respond, or do not respond, to struggling families. When neighbors look away, when institutions are slow, when help is conditional or humiliating, children learn that help is unreliable. They learn that survival depends on personal sacrifice, not collective responsibility. This lesson shapes how they see the world and their place in it. The bikers' realization came when they learned the full story behind the girl's words. It was not just hunger. It was loss, displacement, and abandonment by systems meant to protect vulnerable families. That realization is important because it shifts blame away from the child and places it where it belongs. Children are not failing society. Society is failing them. Every time a child works instead of studies, begs instead of plays, or worries instead of dreams, it is evidence of adult failure. These failures are not always intentional, but they are real. Ignoring them does not make them disappear, it only ensures that the next generation inherits the same struggles. Understanding that children pay for adult failures forces us to reflect on responsibility. Not just parental responsibility, but social responsibility. It asks uncomfortable questions about fairness, priorities, and empathy. Because as long as children are forced to trade their childhood for survival, the cost of adult failure will continue to be paid in silent, irreversible ways. Strength is often misunderstood. Society teaches us to associate strength with power, control, wealth, or physical dominance. We admire those who appear fearless, self-sufficient, and unstoppable. The bikers in this story seem to represent that image: strong machines, loud engines, confident presence. Yet the moment that truly defined their strength had nothing to do with speed, noise, or force. It came when they chose compassion. Compassion requires a different kind of courage. It means allowing yourself to be affected by someone else's pain. It means stopping when it would be easier to move on. Many people avoid compassion because it makes them uncomfortable. It challenges their sense of security and forces them to acknowledge suffering they cannot easily fix. In a world that values toughness, compassion can feel like vulnerability, but it is precisely this vulnerability that makes it powerful. When the girl spoke, the bikers could have dismissed her. They could have assumed she was exaggerating or trying to gain sympathy. That would have been the easier response. Distrust, after all, is socially acceptable. Indifference requires no effort. But compassion asks for attention, patience, and empathy. It asks us to believe someone else's story, even when it disrupts our comfort. True strength shows itself in the willingness to listen. Listening is not passive. It is an active choice. It means putting aside distractions, judgments, and assumptions. The bikers listened not just to the words, but to the meaning behind them. They understood that the girl was not selling a bike. She was asking for help in the only way she knew how. That understanding marked the moment where strength replaced suspicion. Compassion also involves humility. To help someone is to admit that life has treated you more kindly than it has treated them. This can be uncomfortable, especially in cultures that emphasize individual success. People prefer to believe that they earned everything they have purely through effort. Compassion disrupts that belief by reminding us how much of life depends on circumstances beyond our control. Acknowledging this truth requires emotional maturity. Another aspect of compassionate strength is restraint. The bikers did not turn the situation into a performance. They did not seek praise or attention. They responded quietly and practically. This restraint matters because genuine compassion is not about being seen. It is about meeting a need. Strength is not proven by dramatic gestures, but by thoughtful actions that respect the dignity of others. Compassion also demands responsibility. Once you truly see someone's suffering, you cannot pretend you did not notice it. Awareness creates obligation. Many people avoid compassion because they fear this responsibility. They worry that caring once will require them to care always. But true strength lies in understanding that helping when you can does not weaken you. It strengthens the social fabric that ultimately protects everyone. There is also a moral dimension to compassion. It reflects values more deeply than words ever could. Anyone can speak about kindness, but compassion is kindness in action. It is a decision made in real time, often without recognition or reward. That decision reveals character. It shows what someone chooses when there is no pressure to do the right thing. The bikers' strength was not in what they owned, but in how they responded. Their action transformed a moment of desperation into a moment of relief. It did not erase all of the girl's problems, but it reminded her that help can exist, that strangers can care, and that the world is not entirely indifferent. That reminder alone carries immense emotional weight. Compassionate strength also has a ripple effect. When one person acts with empathy, it influences others. It normalizes kindness. It challenges the idea that everyone must look out only for themselves. Over time, these small acts accumulate, shaping communities where people feel safer asking for help and more willing to offer it. Understanding strength as compassion changes how we measure success. It shifts focus from personal gain to shared humanity. It suggests that the strongest individuals are not those who dominate others, but those who use their position, resources, or attention to reduce suffering. This kind of strength does not make headlines, but it leaves lasting impact on lives that might otherwise remain unseen. In redefining strength, this key point invites reflection. It asks us to consider how we respond when faced with quiet suffering. It challenges the idea that caring is a weakness and replaces it with a more demanding truth, that compassion is strength in its most meaningful form. When we think about loss, we often look for a clear villain: poverty, illness, death, or bad luck. But behind many stories of suffering stands a quieter, more powerful force: indifference. Indifference does not steal loudly. It does not announce itself. It works silently, taking opportunities, dignity, and hope little by little while the world looks away. In the story of the girl selling her bike, what took everything from her was not only poverty, but the long chain of people and systems that chose not to notice. Indifference begins with distance. When suffering feels far away, emotionally, socially, or economically, it becomes easy to ignore. People tell themselves that someone else will help, that it is not their responsibility, or that the problem is too big to fix. These thoughts feel harmless, but together they create a culture where suffering is normalized. Hunger becomes expected. Homelessness becomes background noise. Children in distress become invisible. What makes indifference especially damaging is that it often hides behind excuses. People claim they are too busy, too tired, or too powerless. Institutions blame limited resources or complicated rules. Governments delay action under the name of process. Each excuse may sound reasonable on its own, but combined, they form a wall that blocks help from reaching those who need it most. Meanwhile, lives continue to deteriorate. For the girl and her mother, indifference likely appeared many times before the bikers arrived. It appeared when wages were not enough to survive. It appeared when support systems failed to reach them. It appeared when neighbors noticed their struggle but did nothing. Each moment of indifference took something away: food, stability, security, until the girl was left selling her bicycle, a symbol of what little she had left. Indifference is particularly cruel because it does not feel like cruelty to the person practicing it. Unlike active harm, it allows people to maintain a positive self-image. One can walk past suffering and still believe they are a good person. This moral comfort makes indifference widespread and persistent. People rarely see themselves as responsible for what they did not directly cause, even when their inaction contributes to the outcome. Children are especially vulnerable to the effects of indifference. They rely entirely on adults and systems for protection. When those systems fail quietly, children internalize the message that their needs do not matter. Over time, this can be more damaging than physical deprivation. It teaches them that they are alone, that asking for help is risky, and that the world is unreliable. These lessons shape their self-worth and expectations for the future. Indifference also steals dignity. When people are ignored in their suffering, they feel reduced to a problem rather than recognized as human beings. Being unseen hurts deeply. It sends the message that one's pain is insignificant. For a child, this can be devastating. It teaches them that their hunger, fear, and loss are not important enough to interrupt anyone else's life. On a larger scale, indifference allows injustice to continue unchecked. When society becomes accustomed to inequality, it stops questioning it. Poor living conditions become normal for certain groups. Limited access to education or health care becomes expected. This normalization protects the status quo and ensures that those at the bottom remain there. Indifference, in this way, is not passive. It actively maintains unfair systems. The biker's moment of realization matters because it breaks this pattern. By choosing to care, they interrupted indifference. They refused to treat the girl's situation as someone else's problem. That choice exposed an important truth. Indifference is not inevitable. It is a habit, and like all habits, it can be broken with conscious effort. Indifference also affects how stories are told. Many stories of suffering never reach public attention because they lack drama or visibility. Quiet hunger does not trend. Silent sacrifice does not attract cameras. As a result, resources and empathy are often directed toward what is most visible, not what is most urgent. This imbalance further marginalizes those who suffer quietly. Another danger of indifference is how it spreads. When people see others ignoring suffering, they feel justified in doing the same. It becomes socially acceptable not to care. Over time, compassion is seen as optional rather than essential. This erosion of empathy weakens communities and increases isolation, making everyone more vulnerable in the long run. Indifference does not always come from cruelty. Often it comes from fear. Fear of being overwhelmed. Fear of being taken advantage of. Fear of acknowledging uncomfortable truths about inequality. But fear-based indifference still has consequences. Regardless of intention, the outcome is the same. Needs go unmet and lives are diminished. Understanding indifference as the real thief shifts how we assign responsibility. It reminds us that harm is not only caused by what people do, but also by what they fail to do. It challenges the idea that neutrality is harmless. In situations of deep inequality, neutrality often sides with injustice. This key point forces reflection on everyday choices, where we look, what we ignore, and how quickly we move on. Because every moment of indifference, no matter how small, takes something from someone who already has very little. People often believe that changing a life requires extraordinary resources, grand plans, or powerful positions. This belief can become an excuse for inaction. When problems appear too large, individuals convince themselves that their contribution would not matter. Yet many life-changing moments begin with actions that seem small at the time. In the story of the girl and the bikers, the difference was not made by a government program or a charity campaign, but by a simple decision to stop and help. Buying a bicycle may appear insignificant when compared to the scale of poverty. One bike cannot end hunger or fix broken systems, but impact is not measured only by scale, it is measured by relevance. For that girl and her mother, the action addressed an immediate and urgent need. It provided food, stability, and relief at a moment when there were no other options. In that context, the action was not small at all. It was essential. Small actions matter because they happen in real time. Large solutions often take years to design and implement, while people in crisis need help now. A meal today matters more than a promise for next year. A safe night's sleep matters more than a long-term plan that may never reach them. When individuals respond to immediate needs, they fill gaps that larger systems cannot always reach quickly. Another reason small actions are powerful is that they restore dignity. The bikers did not treat the girl as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be respected. Their response acknowledged her humanity. Dignity is often the first thing poverty takes away. When people are forced to beg or explain their suffering repeatedly, they feel reduced and exposed. A thoughtful, respectful action can return a sense of worth that is just as important as material help. Small actions also build trust. For someone living in constant insecurity, trust in others is fragile. Promises are often broken and help is inconsistent. When a stranger follows through with a kind action, it challenges the belief that everyone will disappoint. For a child especially, this moment can shape how they view the world. It can plant the idea that kindness exists even in unexpected places. Impact does not end with the person receiving help. Those who act are changed as well. The bikers likely did not plan to have their perspective altered that day. Yet by engaging directly with suffering, they gained awareness. They learned something about vulnerability, responsibility, and their own capacity to make a difference. Small actions educate the heart in ways that theory cannot. There is also a ripple effect. When one person acts with compassion, others notice. It encourages similar behavior. Kindness becomes visible and therefore repeatable. Over time, these ripples create a culture where helping is normal rather than exceptional. While one action may seem isolated, many small actions combined can shift attitudes and expectations within a community. Small actions are accessible to everyone. Not everyone has wealth, influence, or authority, but everyone has the ability to notice, listen, and respond within their means. This accessibility is important because it places responsibility where it belongs, with all of us. Waiting for someone more powerful to act often delays help indefinitely. When individuals recognize their own capacity, help becomes more immediate and widespread. Another important aspect of small actions is that they reduce feelings of helplessness. Large-scale problems can make people feel powerless, leading to emotional disengagement. Taking a small step breaks that paralysis. It replaces despair with agency. It reminds people that while they cannot do everything, they can do something, and that something matters deeply to someone. For the girl, the biker's action did more than solve a temporary problem. It interrupted a downward spiral. Hunger affects health, concentration, and emotional stability. Addressing it even briefly can prevent further harm. Sometimes, small interventions arrive at critical moments, changing the direction of a life in ways that are impossible to predict. Small actions also humanize social issues. Poverty often becomes a statistic, discussed in numbers and reports. A single act of help turns an abstract problem into a personal connection. That connection makes the issue harder to ignore in the future. Once someone has helped a real person, poverty is no longer just an idea. It has a face, a voice, and a story. Understanding the power of small actions challenges the belief that impact must be dramatic to be meaningful. It shows that change often begins quietly, through ordinary people responding to ordinary moments with care. In a world where suffering is widespread, these small choices collectively shape whether that suffering is met with silence or with humanity. Every moment we encounter suffering, we are faced with a choice. It may not feel like one, but it is. The choice is rarely dramatic. It does not announce itself as a moral test. It appears quietly in passing moments. When we notice someone struggling, when we hear an uncomfortable truth, when a situation interrupts our routine. What we choose in those moments shapes not only the outcome for others, but the kind of people we become. The bikers did not set out that day intending to change a life. They were simply traveling, enjoying their time. The choice came unexpectedly in the form of a child's voice. They could have chosen to ignore her, to assume her story was not their concern, or to convince themselves that helping once would not change anything. These are common, socially accepted choices, but they made a different one. That difference is what gives the story its meaning. Choice is powerful because it exists even within limitations. People often believe that if they cannot solve a problem completely, they should not engage with it at all. This belief turns imperfection into an excuse. In reality, choice is not about fixing everything. It is about deciding how we respond to what is in front of us. The bikers could not end poverty, but they could respond to one child, in one moment, with care. What makes choice uncomfortable is responsibility. Once we recognize that we can choose, we can no longer hide behind ignorance or helplessness. Awareness removes the comfort of neutrality. This is why many people avoid truly seeing suffering. Seeing forces a decision. Looking away feels easier because it delays accountability. Yet every act of looking away is also a choice, one that allows suffering to continue unchanged. Choice also reflects values. People may claim kindness, empathy, or morality as personal traits, but these qualities are revealed through action, not intention. When faced with inconvenience or emotional discomfort, values are tested. The decision to help or not to help exposes priorities. It shows what matters enough to interrupt our plans. Another important aspect of choice is timing. Opportunities to act are often brief. The girl stood there for a moment. She could have been ignored, dismissed, or missed entirely. Many chances to help pass quickly, and once they are gone, they cannot be reclaimed. Choice requires presence, the ability to be attentive to the moment rather than lost in distraction or routine. Choice also shapes habits. When people repeatedly choose indifference, it becomes easier each time. Compassion, too, is a habit. The more often people choose to care, the more natural it becomes. Over time, these individual habits influence collective behavior. Communities are shaped not by a single decision, but by the patterns of choices made every day. It is important to recognize that choice does not always mean dramatic sacrifice. Sometimes it means listening instead of dismissing. Sometimes it means giving time rather than money. Sometimes it means treating someone with respect instead of suspicion. These choices may feel small, but they define the moral climate of everyday life. Choice is also about how we tell ourselves stories. People often justify inaction by creating narratives. They will waste the help. Someone else will handle it. Or it's not my problem. These stories protect us from discomfort, but they also distance us from reality. Choosing compassion often requires rejecting these convenient narratives and accepting uncertainty. Helping does not guarantee perfect outcomes, but refusing to help guarantees none. For children, the choices adults make are especially significant. Each act of kindness or indifference teaches them something about the world. When adults choose to help, children learn that suffering is noticed and that care exists. When adults choose to ignore, children learn the opposite. These lessons influence how they grow, how they treat others, and whether they believe their own needs are valid. Choice is not equal for everyone. Some people have more resources, time, or security than others. But choice exists at every level. Even within constraints, there is always some degree of agency. Recognizing this prevents the transfer of responsibility entirely onto institutions or abstract systems. While large-scale change matters, individual choices are where values become visible. Understanding that we all have a choice removes the comfort of detachment. It reminds us that humanity is expressed not only in grand gestures, but in everyday decisions. Each time we encounter need, we are deciding what kind of society we are contributing to, one shaped by avoidance or one shaped by care. Ladies and gentlemen, that little girl did not ask for sympathy. She did not ask for charity. She asked for help in the only way she knew how. Her story reminds us that suffering is not always loud, that children often carry burdens created by adults, and that indifference can take more than poverty ever could. It shows us that real strength lies in compassion, that small actions can change the direction of a life, and that every one of us has a choice when we are faced with another human being in need. We may not all ride powerful bikes or have money to give every time, but we all have the ability to stop, to listen, and to care. And sometimes that is enough to restore hope where it has been slowly disappearing. So the next time a quiet voice speaks, may we not rush past it. May we remember that behind simple words can be deep hunger, hidden loss, and silent courage. And may we choose, again and again, to be the ones who do not look away, because humanity survives not through grand promises, but through moments when compassion answers a soft call for help.